What happens when archives tell us inconvenient truths? What is the relationship between not disinformation, but information and knowledge? Let me take you back to the evening of 28th October 2018. It is Diwali, the Indian Festival of Lights, and we are, imagine, in Trafalgar Square.
Happy Diwali, everyone!
This year, Mayor Sadiq Khan took to the stage to wish a happy Diwali to everyone celebrating around the world, and also to pay tribute to the soldiers who lost their lives in the Great War.
More than 1.4 million people who fought in that war were from Indian origin.
Celebrate all those who contributed to that war ending and us ultimately winning the war. We should understand and cherish our history, but also it's a chance for all of us to say thank you. Thank you for all those who fought in that war and whose fighting meant we have the freedoms that we enjoy today.
It's been a day of celebration and a time to reflect as the Diwali festival draws to a close for another year in Trafalgar Square. Amy Wiltshire, Forces News, London.
Sadiq Khan actually was singing from the same hymn sheet as of his kind of political opponent, Baroness Saida Warsi, the Tory MP. As early as 2013, in the lead-up to the centennial commemoration of the First World War, Warsi had spoken powerfully that, I quote, "Our boys on the front line weren't just Tommies, they were Tariqs and Tajinders, 1 million Indian soldiers fighting and dying for our country. We have a duty to remember their bravery and commemorate their sacrifices." As the daughter of Pakistani immigrants, I proudly bang the drum for Britain's heritage, for it is mine too. And then finally she concludes, after all, our shared future is based on our shared past. In many ways, Saida Warsi was doing something very important. First, she was battling historical amnesia about the entire colonial contribution to the two world wars. More immediately, she was also fighting against the ultra-nationalist rhetoric which had tried to turn the First World War in 2018, that is the year of the centennial commemoration, into something very narrow. You'd remember that this was when the terrorist attacks were happening, and she was also fighting actively Islamophobia. Finally, Warsi wanted to embed the First World War in a more multiracial and multireligious vision, and that was part of her agenda for a more multicultural society. Imperial war service in this equation becomes the ground of a fairer, more multicultural Britain. But what if the archives tell you something different? And in the next kind of 12 minutes or so, I would like to tell you a story that is slightly different, a bit more difficult, even painful. Just to give you a sense of the colonial contribution to the First World War, around 4 million men of color were recruited into the armies of Europe and the United States, of which 2 million were Africans. But of all the colonies, dominions, and kind of different areas in possession of the different European empires, particularly Germany, France, and Britain, it was the Indian subcontinent that contributed the highest number of men, including 900,000 soldiers and 600,000 non-combatants. We have a lot of information. We know that they were recruited from northern India. We know that they fought in various places, from the Western Front to Gallipoli to East Africa to Mesopotamia. We know that they won some of the first Victoria Crosses to be awarded to Indians. But how much do we know about what they felt on first coming to Europe, what they thought, how they imagined the world around them? The main problem for us today is actually not Eurocentrism, but the fact that these were non-literate people. They didn't know how to read or write. Consequently, we need to create our own archive, and this is where I say, what is the relationship between knowledge and information? We also need to know what questions to ask of this archive. And I'd just like to take you through some of the finds and then leave you with some more questions. My first find actually happened when I was on holiday. I was in India, and I was visiting this little town near Calcutta called Chandanagar, a former French colony. And I'd gone to a little museum where I came across a pair of bloodstained glasses. And I was told that they belonged to John Sen, who was killed in May 1915. He was part of Leeds Pals Battalion. End of story. A month after that, I was presenting a paper at Leeds, when suddenly I was stopped, and I'd woven John Sen's story into my paper, when I was stopped mid-sentence by someone in the audience who stood up and said, well, his name is just outside the room I was speaking, the Leeds kind of war memorial. And then I started doing more investigation. I found out that he had a BSc in engineering, that he was enrolled in Leeds University. He spoke 7 languages. And many of his comrades agreed on the fact that he was the most educated person in the entire battalion. But since he was Indian, a person of color, he was never promoted, he was just a private. So it is a predictably depressing story of discrimination, but it gives a lie to this idea of the shared past. But then my other finds, they were more joyous, even tantalizing, a bit scandalous. From Calcutta, I went to Delhi, and I was in the National Archives, where I came across a little note which carried the name Mir Mast. This is the name. This is the person. I was immediately transfixed because I knew this name. He was one of the very few Indians who, during the First World War in 1915, had defected to the German side with 12 other Pathans with this map. He just crossed over the no man's land, and then he was sent on an extraordinary jihadi mission across Central Asia. He goes to Constantinople and then to Kabul, and then he finally lands up in India, where he catches the Spanish flu, and he dies. But it is an extraordinary trajectory of a man who actually defects to the other side. And then I came across a little envelope which said, trench book confiscated. And I remember with trembling hands, I opened, it was sealed. I was given the permission to break the seal. I opened the envelope, and I thought I was about to touch the heart of the Indian soldier and get to have this kind of knowledge, almost this kind of physical contact. And I thought that the notebook would be full of words like jihadi, Islam, nationalism, India, Hindustan. This is what I found. And I suddenly realized, these are young men. And this is one of the reality checks for the pious literary post-colonial scholar. This is what soldiers all across the world were perhaps thinking. And I find it very poignant because it's appetites in different senses of the word when one is surrounded by mortality and danger. In a way, I find it almost like an ode to life. And then there are more conventional sources. The Indians, didn't know how to read or write, but they would often dictate letters to scribes. And we have some of these letters in the British Library. They were translated and extracted by the colonial censors. And this is one of them. So on one hand, we have the information. 5,525 Germans were taken prisoners. Our king, God bless him, is going to win and will win soon. And then in that letter was folded another smaller letter which said, as you can read, God knows whether the land of France is stained with sin or whether the day of judgment has begun in France. O God, we repent. O God, we repent. Hardly a story of bravery or sacrifice. Colonial archives are remarkably ambivalent. It's full of conflict. My final document, the one I'm going to share today, it's perhaps the most moving thing I found, and this was in Berlin, in the Sound Archives. This was when the colonial prisoners were found in Germany, since the German anthropologists could no longer travel to different places. They thought, this is ideal. We'll visit the colonial prisoners of war camps, and we'll record their voices, even film them, measure them. So this was the Royal Prussian Phonographic Commission, which between 1915 and 1918 would visit the different prisoner of war camps, where there were prisoners of color, colonial prisoners, and they would ask them to read something. This is the Half Moon Camp, where they even built a mosque, trying to convert them so that they join on the Ottoman side. And they would ask them to often read something or sing a song. And we have 2,000 of these sound recordings at the Humboldt Sound Archives. But one prisoner, by the name of Mal Singh, he turned this ethnological experiment into one of the most poignant testimonies across the entire spectrum of First World War records. And this was recorded in 1916. And this is his voice.
एक आदमी थी, शेर मांस मक्खन खाता थी हिंदुस्तान में, दो शेर दूध पीता थी। एक आदमी उस किसी आदमी ने उसने अंग्रेजा की नौकरी की, वो आदमी जुर्म।
Sorry, I'll come to. Instead of loyalist colonial superheroes or paid mercenaries, what we have here is the reality of sepoy and perhaps soldier life. We have this intense sense of longing where home is remembered as taste on the palate, this little key that he wants. I wanted to give you a flavor of these documents because I think they're lightning rods into the past in all their messiness, their contradictions, and their intractability. And though Said Abozi and Sadiq Khan were trying to instrumentalize the past with the best of intentions for a multicultural society, there are certain problems, for we also have a responsibility to the past in all its bitterness. And this is where I think literature also plays a role, because the archival documents, they're like tiny moments. I often think of these lives that are illuminated for a tiny second in the archives, and then they vanish to darkness. But often literary narratives, they trace the entire arc of a life. Here I've got three very different works of art. An imperial text, Rudyard Kipling's Eyes of Asia, 1917, where he imagines himself to be an Indian sepoy. A nationalist recreation of the First World War by Mulk Rajanand, and then this is 1940s, and then a post-colonial one, 2014, by Camilla Shamsi, A God in Every Stone. But what all of them share through their multi-stranded narrative is the sense of curiosity, this kind of sensuous knowledge, and their testimony to what I call the messiness and contradictions of the past, particularly Imperial War service, including Kipling. I grew up in India. I studied English at Presidency College, Calcutta, which is the oldest English department in the world. I could recite by heart the poems of Wilfred Owen, but I was not at all aware of the scale of India's contribution to the First World War. Again, a sort of colonial knowledge. So I was absolutely delighted when now we have a much more global understanding of the First World War. But there are two things that worry me. First, often this diversity of the First World War becomes an ideological smokescreen where many of the militaristic elements that had been expunged or debunked by people like Wilfred Owen come back under this ethnic guise. For example, through triumphal statues, through military recreations, or this poppy hijab, which becomes a test of loyalty. It can also lapse into imperial nostalgia, part legitimation, part celebration of warfare, a sanitization of the violence of both war and empire. It can also become a commemoration of the dead in other wars, much more contentious, from Iraq to Afghanistan. And what I wanted to leave you with is this tension between a more ethical and a more instrumental use of war memory. It makes us ask, what do we commemorate? What do we leave out? And why do we commemorate? What lies before us is the most difficult task of purging these commemorative discourses, of these militarist tendencies, its sanitization of the violence, as I say, of both war and empire. As Susan Sontag, quoting Virginia Woolf, said, "Let the images of war haunt us." Instead of a plinth or a memorial, maybe an exhibition or a book or archival records, provide perhaps a more productive thinking space where we think knowledgeably, responsibly, and critically, and commemorate the people even when we disagree with them without commemorating war itself.